Welcome to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. Tonight's top stories. The Supreme Court prepares to hear two cases challenging the federal contraceptive mandate. We'll talk to an attorney representing the plaintiffs about what the court might consider in making its decision and how sweeping that decision might be. This man was shot in the face by members of the terrorist group Boko Haram. Now he's speaking out about the plight of persecuted Christians in Nigeria. We'll bring you his story, then talk with Congressman Chris Smith about how to stop the violence. And think sex trafficking only happens in other countries? It could be happening in your neighborhood, with predators targeting your children. We'll tell you about one young woman who escaped the nightmare and talk with experts about how you can protect your daughters. Thanks for joining us. Pope Francis is calling for prayers for a group of religious sisters abducted from their convent in Syria. During his general audience today, the Pope urged pilgrims to pray for the 12 Greek Orthodox nuns who were taken by force by Syrian opposition fighters on Monday. The Muslim rebels recently overran the Christian town of Malula, where the sisters' monastery of St. Tekla is located. The American Civil Liberties Union and its Michigan chapter are suing the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in federal court. The group claims that the bishops' ethical and religious directives for Catholic hospitals force those hospitals to deliver substandard medical care. The case was filed on behalf of a woman who developed an infection and delivered an 18-week-old baby that died hours after birth at a Catholic hospital in Michigan in 2010. The ACLU claims the woman endured a painful and unnecessarily risky breech delivery because hospital staffers failed to tell her that inducing early labor, and thus terminating her pregnancy, was one of her medical options. The Bishops' Conference is not commenting on the lawsuit, but Dr. John Haas of the National Catholic Bioethics Center told EWTN News Nightly that if media accounts are true, the fault lies not with the bishops' directives, but with the hospital staff. Haas said the staff may have gone against the bishop's directives by failing to offer informed consent and appropriate treatment for the woman's infection, even if that treatment resulted in the unintentional death of the baby. Many Catholics are welcoming the U.S. Supreme Court's recent decision to hear two cases that challenge the federal contraceptive mandate. That mandate requires most religious employers to provide insurance that covers contraceptives, sterilization, and drugs that can, in some circumstances, cause abortions or face stiff penalties come January. Among the 86 legal cases against the mandate are lawsuits from the evangelical Christian owners of retail giant Hobby Lobby and the Mennonite owners of cabinet-making company Conestoga Wood. Both say the mandate violates their religious liberty. The High Court is expected to hear their cases in March. Closely watching those cases will be Archbishop William Lori of Baltimore, chair of the U.S. Bishops' Religious Liberty Committee. Lori told me recently that the bishops remain steadfastly opposed to the mandate.
The bishops have maintained just a wonderful unanimity that this mandate is a burden, that we should be able to do our apostolates according to our own teaching, that we should continue to do them, and that we should be able to provide, as we always have, good health insurance for the people that work so hard for the church.
Joining me now to talk about the cases the Supreme Court will hear is Lori Windham. She's senior counsel for the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, the legal group representing Hobby Lobby. The Becket Fund also represents a number of other groups suing over this mandate, including this network. Welcome, Lori. Thanks for joining me.
Colleen, thank you for having me on.
Let's dig right into this case, specifically the Hobby Lobby case, which you and the Becket Fund are representing. A lot of folks have said that the key issue here is whether corporations and for-profit employers have the same right to religious expression and freedom as an individual. Some say that's a bogus argument, that the Founding Fathers never intended to give these rights to corporations. How do you answer that? And is that going to be one of the key issues in play here in the court?
I think that is going to be a very important issue in this case. And I think the question is flipped backwards. The question is, do Americans give up their First Amendment freedoms just because they open a family business? The First Amendment has long been understood to protect the free exercise rights of corporations such as churches, synagogues, mosques, other sorts of organized religious groups. And so we believe it should also protect Americans when they come together to form a family business.
And the Greens, who are the owners of Hobby Lobby, they're evangelical Christians. They operate their business according to principles of faith. They have said that they're okay with 16 of the 20 contraceptives that are covered under this mandate. It's those remaining 4, specifically morning after pill and week after pill, that they have real trouble with. So I'm wondering, from the standpoint of Catholics and Catholic corporations that are not okay with any contraceptives, would a victory for Hobby Lobby still translate into a larger victory for these other plaintiffs, including this network, EWTN, who's objecting to all contraceptive coverage being forced upon them by this mandate?
I think it's very likely that it would. The issues are not that different between businesses who object to a small subset of contraceptives and those who object to contraception generally. You're still talking about a core religious freedom question. Do Americans lose that core religious freedom when they open a business? And is their religious freedom substantially burdened by a government mandate that forces them to do something that's contrary to their faith? And so I believe that the Supreme Court's answers in Hobby Lobby and Conestoga are going to be very important for those other cases as well.
And do you expect to see a rather sweeping decision or more limited?
You know, it's always hard to guess. I hate to
Right.
predict what a court I'm in front of is going to do. The last time the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was before the Supreme Court, they ruled 9-0 in favor of the religious group who was challenging a federal law. And so we're very hopeful for a good outcome at the Supreme Court.
And one more question. I've seen that fines of $1.3 million a day could be levied against the Green family if they don't comply with this mandate come January. So what happens since the Supreme Court isn't expected to hand down a decision till June? What do they do in the interim? Are they paying those? What do these employers do?
Right now, the Green family has protection because they won their appeal below at the 10th Circuit. They have a court order protecting them until the Supreme Court decides so that they are not having to pay any fines.
But that doesn't apply, I suppose, to the others who aren't.
No, some businesses have won, others have not, and so they're having to deal with these issues right now.
Well, we'll continue watching this closely. Thank you for joining me, Lori Windham.
Thank you.
We turn now from religious liberty concerns at home to a much bloodier battle over religious liberty abroad. At its center is Boko Haram, an anti-Christian terrorist group in Nigeria that's one of the world's deadliest. EWTN News Nightly's Jason Calvi brings us the story of one Christian who came face to face with the terrorists and lived to tell the tale.
The entering place of the bullet through my nose.
Abila Adamu survived a death sentence. His offense?
When the leader asked me, Habila, are you ready to die as a Christian? I say yes, because I know that I am serving the living God. I am ready to see my God. I'm ready to see him.
You can see the scars left by an AK-47's bullet 1 year ago.
I give thanks to God Almighty for saving my life.
But the Islamic terrorist group Boko Haram has killed thousands. According to the Global Terrorism Database, from 2009 until 2012, the group led 550 attacks against northern Nigerian police, this UN building, and churches.
Last year, there were 47 attacks on churches. Damaturu is a city in Yobe State. Out of 77 churches, only 5 remain open.
Emmanuel Agabe monitors the situation in his native country.
If foxes were being hunted the way Christians are being hunted in northern Nigeria, there would be a global uproar.
Boko Haram roughly translates Western education is forbidden. Their stated goal is to set up an Islamic State in Nigeria. In November, the State Department labeled Boko Haram a foreign terrorist organization. That allows the U.S. government to freeze any of the group's assets in U.S. banks. It also makes it a crime to assist Boko Haram. But since they've been around for more than 10 years and been ramping up violence since 2009, many are asking what took so long.
So we've worked over the years with our international partners as well as with the government of Nigeria to deepen our understanding of the organization.
If recognizing the problem is the first step in a 12-step recovery program, then hooray, they finally recognized the problem. We have 11 more steps to go.
And one of the steps Habila recommends is help you can offer.
We need your prayers that God will give them the strength to stand to the end.
Habila, his wife, and 2 children are still standing in northern Nigeria.
Nothing can separate us from the love of Christ.
Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining me now to talk about the persecution of Christians in Africa and worldwide is New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith, who recently met with Boko Haram's victims in Nigeria. Welcome, Congressman.
Colleen, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And now, Congressman, you know the gentleman whom our reporter interviewed,
yes.
And you were on the ground in Nigeria in September, right? What did you
exactly.
see?
Well,
What's
I met
the situation?
I was in Jos, met with Habila, had a wonderful conversation with him. As a matter of fact, when he told his story, I immediately invited him and I said, would you testify? And he did. He came to Washington, testified before my Human Rights Africa subcommittee. And his story, as you have so well portrayed, is riveting. Here he is, put down to the floor, AK-47 to his head, into his nose, really. His wife crying profusely, and he would not renounce our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and did so saying, I'm ready to see my Lord. They shot him, left him for dead, and miraculously he survived, and now has told the world, and especially through your good offices here, through the interview you're doing, so many people will now hear his story of bravery and faithfulness to God.
Now, what took so long to label this group a terrorist organization?
Colleen, I've been pushing for years that Boko Haram be categorized as a foreign terrorist organization, which enables us to help track where the money is coming from, to buy those AK-47s and rocket grenade launchers and all the other the munitions that are using to slaughter Christians, particularly in the northern parts, but all over the country, but especially in northern Nigeria. It took them a long time. I introduced legislation to admonish them to do that, and on the day of my hearing, they announced they would finally designate Boko Haram, which is an al-Qaeda type, or like al-Shabaab in Somalia, organization that is absolutely radicalized, hates Christians with a passion, doesn't like Muslims that are pious and don't want to join in the killing fields either. And we met with a number of Muslims in Jos and elsewhere. Matter of fact, Kagama, Archbishop Kagama in Jos is working side by side with the Muslim leaders in Jos to try to push a reconciliation and a peace agenda, and when mullahs speak out, they get targeted and killed as well. But it's mostly, overwhelmingly, Christians that are being targeted by these fanatics.
Now, when we look at this issue, it seems like post 9/11, it's not politically correct to say what you just said, which is that it is, by and large, Christians being targeted, which is not to say that peaceful Muslims are not also targeted. Right. But when we look at the worldwide picture, I mean, I know even at neighboring, Central African Republic, we've got a State Department spokesperson who said, recently that that's not a religious problem, the persecution that's going on there, and yet the violence seems to be overwhelmingly directed by Islamic radicals toward Christians. So what is that? What's going on? Is that a matter of domestic politics? Politicians, the State Department, whomever, not wanting to raise hackles by labeling this a religious persecution
problem? Well, I think
problem?
we have to be willing to call it what it is. And in Egypt, the Christian Copts are being targeted. I have a hearing on that next week. It'll be my 4th hearing focusing on this horrible persecution of Christian Coptics, which went from bad to worse when the Muslim Brotherhood were in charge. And in Syria, the pro-Syrian forces especially have targeted Christians, and I had a hearing on this, and I met with a number of the survivors.
So why aren't we hearing this?
We need to be saying it the way it is. No political correctness. Again, there are many Muslims who abhor and are targeted as well. But these radicalized, gang-like terrorists who label Christians as expendable and then slaughter Christians need to be called to account, and we need to use every tool, and certainly designation as foreign terrorist organization is one means to try to dry up the supply of funding going to these individuals in Boko Haram.
Now, for Christians who are looking at the worldwide picture, which seems to be getting worse, would you agree?
It is. No doubt about it. I'm going to be doing a number of hearings on the persecuted Christians worldwide as a group, Catholics, Christians, evangelicals throughout the planet. In China, Christians are crushed. I mean, literally put into gulags, forced labor, tortured, and killed if they're part of the underground Christian church. And not part of the patriotic Christian, which is run, sadly, by the government.
Yeah. Real quickly, we're almost out of time. What can a viewer at home do to support brothers and sisters in Christ who are facing this kind of violence?
First and foremost, pray. Pray for our persecuted brethren, but also demand that the U.S. Congress, and especially the White House, which has been AWOL on issues related to religious persecution worldwide in China and elsewhere, to do more. This president has not raised the issue of persecuted Christians. It is just shunted aside, and very little is done. There are some individuals in the State Department who care, but the modus operandi of this White House is neglect, neglect, and more neglect.
So letters, phone calls, pressure on your local...
And say it's time to speak out for these persecuted Christians. In Syria, the groups that the U.S. government is backing, not in toto, but we say we vet who we give arms to, but the pro-Syrian army types, many of those are filled to overflowing with al-Qaeda ranks who are persecuting Christians and killing them.
Congressman Chris Smith, thanks for your work on this issue.
Colleen.
We have to run to a break right now, but when we come back, we'll talk with our Rome correspondent about the latest from the Vatican. Stay with us. Welcome back to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. We go now to the Vatican, where Pope Francis is in the midst of meeting with the 8 cardinals who advise him on church reform. Our Rome correspondent, Alan Holdren, has more. Alan, what are the cardinals working on this week?
Well, the real news from these meetings, this 3 days of meetings, is that they're going through one by one and examining the different Vatican departments to see how they can better work, to see how they can streamline them, to develop collaboration between one department and another, possibly also to merge different departments. All of this is part of the Pope's plan to reform the Curia, and they said that it's going to be an in-depth reform. We can't expect small changes, and for this reason, we can't expect a short time frame either. It's going to go well beyond what people probably originally thought. The next meetings are in February, and we can't expect any concrete conclusions before then.
Interesting. And Alan, let's talk about the Pope's new apostolic exhortation, the joy of the gospel. This document has a lot of folks talking. In it, Francis calls on Catholics to renew their missionary zeal and get out into the streets with the gospel. He says he'd prefer a church that's bruised, hurting, and dirty from being on the streets to one that's unhealthy from clinging to its own security. Francis also criticizes trickle-down economics, consumerism, and what he described as spiritual worldliness among Catholics. This is provocative stuff. Some are calling this the Pope's Reform Manifesto. How's it going over at the Vatican?
Well, from a Vatican perspective, it's very interesting that he said that he'd like to decentralize the papacy and give more responsibility to the local bishops' conferences in the world, to make them a focal point for the Catholics in those regions. Also, talking to Vatican officials here, they're very interested in the fact that he spent so much time in the document. There's almost 30 pages dedicated to preaching and how they can make their homilies better, how they can make them more concise, shorter, how they can prepare better for them, and ultimately share the fire of the faith with the faithful. That wasn't the only thing that I got as a response here. One other official told me that this gave the Pope a chance to address his critics. So here in the first 10 months of the papacy, there have been some issues, like the fact that he hasn't been as vocal about speaking out in defense of life issues as some would have liked. He takes that on, and he says that the Church's teaching on abortion is unchangeable. What he would like to see is greater care for women who are pregnant and in difficult situations. So what he's asking is for the faithful, priests, laity, to bring the joy that is in them as Christians into the streets and share it with others.
Much to ponder there. Okay, thanks, Alan. Well, it's one of the fastest growing criminal industries worldwide, and sex trafficking is also a problem right here in the U.S., where predators target girls as young as 9 for lives of indentured servitude and prostitution. This past summer, the FBI arrested 150 alleged traffickers and rescued more than 100 exploited minors. It was the largest child prostitution sting in Bureau history. But for victims of sex trafficking, getting off the streets is just the first step. EWTN News Nightly's Jonathan Liedl has one survivor's story.
Brianna's story began in a broken home.
My dad got a girlfriend. I felt like the love that I wanted was shifted towards somebody else. So I was 13, disobedient, normal teenage girl stuff. And I ran away from home.
Alone and on the streets, a man took her in.
He was just, giving me attention, and he bought me new clothes, fed me, put a roof over my head.
But soon, he put a condition on his kindness: have sex with strangers for cash.
You form feelings for this guy, and you want to make him happy. And the only way you make him happy is to bring him money.
For 7 years, Brianna was prostituted by 4 different pimps.
I grew numb to it, numb to the feeling of it, and just saw it as, oh, well, it's life, suck it up. But deep down inside, it was just more like, I just want to show him that I'm loyal, and I just want that love from him.
That's a common refrain from victims of sex trafficking, according to FBI Supervisory Special Agent Eric Pauly.
They have something that they're missing. They have a need that needs to be fulfilled, and these pimps are master manipulators, and they will find it and they will exploit it.
Pauly says combating sex trafficking isn't only about getting girls off the streets, but filling in the gaps that pimps exploit. That's where organizations like Restoration Ministries come in.
Our whole purpose of everything we do is to build long-term relationships with these girls.
Candace Wheeler is the president and founder of the DC group. She ministers to victims of sex trafficking through Bible studies, prayer groups, and mentoring.
When people have been traumatized, the majority of people will turn to faith to make some kind of meaning out of that trauma. And so it's really important to be that bridge and help connect them to Christ.
It's an approach that has made an impact on the lives of girls like Brianna.
You would just continue to hear your voice in a clear way. I know I'm not here to fix anybody. I'm here to be a vessel for the Holy Spirit to move through so that He can bring their restoration process.
And Brianna says she looks at Candace not as a therapist, but as a friend.
She actually helped me restore my faith and restore my belief in God. Candace always told me, God put you here for a reason, that I need to tell my story because my story will help out a lot of others.
Jonathan Liedl, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining me now to talk about the problem of sex trafficking are Detective Bill Woolf, a human trafficking investigator who works in a municipal police department here in the D.C. area, as well as with federal agencies, and Nancy Winston, Senior Director of Shared Hope International, a Christian group that works to prevent trafficking and restore dignity to victims. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Bill, let's start with you. I've heard it said often that even though we tend to assume the girls who are preyed upon by traffickers are uniformly poor and growing up in violent neighborhoods, that's not necessarily the case. So tell us, what are some of the commonalities between the victims of these traffickers?
Unfortunately, sex trafficking is something that cuts across all races, ethnicities, genders, and especially socioeconomic classes. I've worked cases and investigated situations where the victims have come from homes where parents make almost $1 million a year, and then also from very poor homes.
And how do the predators find their victims? What are they looking for?
So a lot of times they're just preying on particular vulnerabilities. They're looking for, in our teenage population, kids that are having problems at home, are having self-esteem issues, they lack understanding of healthy relationships. They find them most commonly on the internet through social media, and then target them and draw them into their sex trafficking enterprise.
And Nancy, we know this age, it goes as young as 9, but 12 to 14 seems to be kind of the key age where this is happening to girls. What is it about that age for girls that makes them particularly vulnerable to trafficking and attractive to those who would exploit them?
Well, I think that it's the general idea that a child that age is just finding herself, and it goes for boys too, finding themselves, trying to figure out who they are in the world, and this person comes along and befriends them, meets a need that they have, builds them up, and helps them define who they are. And they define it in a very wicked way and try to manipulate them and turn them into a product. we always say that a girl's greatest vulnerability is simply her age.
Interesting. Now, the young woman we just profiled ran away from home, which I know is a common scenario with those who become victims of this, but there are also those who become victims when they're living right under their parents' roof. What are some warning signs that a girl might be on the road toward this or in some sort of relationship that could turn exploitative like this?
Well, for one thing, it's very dangerous to let your child hang out at the mall and be off away from the family all the time and with her peers all the time. It's a dangerous world. As Detective Woolf pointed out, everyone is into social media, and kids are finding things that adults have no idea that they're finding out there online and getting entrapped. One of the places that's most common for girls to fall into this life is in your mall. Being around away from family with kids, where these pimps can look for them and approach them and say, hey, you've got beautiful eyes, and that's how it starts. So.
And the internet obviously feeding this through the social media in terms of these guys finding their victims, but you've also talked, Bill, about the influence of pornography and how that's kind of fed this problem. Could you tell us more about that? Is it that it's creating a market for it, or? Yeah,
absolutely. So the research now suggests that individuals who view pornography start to have a skewed view of healthy sexual relationships themselves. So in our adult male population, it's beginning to create this demand for commercial sex. Individuals that are engaged in committed relationships, normal healthy sexual relationships, they're finding their partners won't engage in this type of activity that they're seeing in pornography, and we know that pornography is becoming much more violent and degrading towards women. It has an actual chemical reaction in the brain. It causes this addiction almost to these fantasies that they're viewing. And then, so that's creating more demand, absolutely.
And Nancy, with girls who are dealing with this, I mean, can faith inoculate in some sense a girl from this, or are there certain things a Christian parent really needs to be mindful of when raising children to protect them?
Of course you want to bring them up in the faith, and we all recognize as parents that they're going to hit an age where they're going to have to decide whether that faith is really theirs or whether they've just inherited it from the family. And that's also part of the vulnerability. They're questioning that at this young teen age as well. And so what we often find is that kids come back to the Lord after an experience like this. Many kids are actually hurt by people who claim to be religious. I read a statistic one time that said 92% of registered sex offenders say they're religious. So kids may have had an experience of hurt even in the church, and so they need to come back to the Lord through somebody offering them hope.
And we're almost out of time, but Bill, real quickly, you're a father of 5, you have 3 young daughters. What's the one thing you would like parents to know to protect their children, and especially their daughters, from this?
Be involved in their lives. So often nowadays parents say, well, they're teenagers, so we need to give them their freedom and their privacy. And really what we don't understand is by giving them that privacy and that freedom, we're making them vulnerable to these predators that are out there. So be involved in your kids' lives. Like Nancy was mentioning, you have to give them that identity through the faith, nurturing them, give them the identity within their family so that they know that they're loved, that they're a member of a unit. And so that's just really important for parents to know and be aware of who their friends are and what they're doing online.
Bill Woolf, Nancy Winston, thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for tonight. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And you can catch our entire program again on EWTN's YouTube page. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell, and on behalf of all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.